The slowdown in China, right? Back in the day, and you remember this, the magic number for China's economy was 8% GDP growth a year. That was the number. If they managed to hit that number, they would be able to create enough jobs to absorb roughly about 10 million people a year entering the workforce, maintain social stability, keep themselves in power, right? Now that A, the economy is slowing down, B, the China workforce is actually shrinking because of demographics. What is the magic number? Is there one? I mean, obviously they're hitting it and doing at least better than that. Otherwise, we would see much more unrest than we do in China now.
Well, I mean, you've sort of said it. I mean, China had to hit a certain growth rate in that earlier phase because they had to find the jobs for all the people leaving the countryside and coming to the cities. And that was a great pressure. But that pressure's gone because basically migration from the countryside is now running at a very low level, and it will get smaller because of the demographic situation. So China doesn't need a growth rate that they had before for that reason anymore.
So here's the thing, okay? The other thing people talk about with regards to China's economy is this whole rebalancing idea, right? I get kind of tired of seeing it every day, but less smokestack manufacturing, more new economy services, etc., right? Part of the success of that, if they're able to do it, will hinge on whether or not they're able to, this whole phrase SOE reform, right, which involves millions of workers potentially who could be redundant because that's all they've done their whole lives. They can't be retrained overnight to suddenly work in a call center or an internet company. What happens then?
Well, you see, just on this growth rate, to finish that point off, I mean, we always knew that at a certain point, I mean, the Chinese said this. The Chinese are very honest and frank about their economic progress. That's why they're so good at it, because they don't bullshit. They get on with the job and they deliver. And they have always said that at some, that as we develop, the growth rate will decline. And there have been many voices in China that have felt that actually it should have begun to happen a bit earlier. Because while they've had their foot on the accelerator in the way that they have, then there have been certain costs, environmental costs, the difficulty of shifting the center of gravity. The later in terms of the economy, the later you leave it, the harder it becomes. The greater the danger that the fall in the growth rate will be that much greater or that much faster. So they've been very aware of this. Now, what they are trying to do now is, as you say, to shift the nature of the economy. This is the great question now. Can they do it? If they don't do it, then they'll get stuck in the middle income trap because they will not be able to improve their labor.
Is that the worst possible outcome, just getting stuck in the middle income trap, or is it social instability? Because we're talking about millions of workers here at SOEs.
If there's large-scale unemployment and they can't provide jobs for them, that would create a lot of social instability. But if you look at what's happening, so it's a very complicated shift, and we shouldn't play games with the shift because we need the Chinese to succeed in this, because China's now the most important economy in the world for the rest of us. So this is very important. The most important question is the shift from a labor-intensive manufacturing economy to a knowledge-intensive value-added economy. This is the big question, to shift from manufacturing to services. Now, on this front, the Chinese are doing well. They're ahead of what they themselves, their aim.
But this is happening despite the government, though.
No. It's not happening despite the government. But the government's been extremely important in its macroeconomic measures in relationship to it. Tertiary sector, service sector now accounts for over 50% of the Chinese economy, and manufacturing is down to 40%. So that is a big shift in a short space of time, something that actually will take 10 to 20 years, in my view, and it's happened quite quickly. In the longer run, as a developed economy, they'd be aiming for around 65% in the tertiary sector. Okay, so that is one area of success. Increasing consumption, they've been less successful. Between 2010 and 2015, they only managed to increase consumption as a proportion of GDP from 36 to 38%. And they're trying to boost the size of the consumption market.
Still saving too much? Because
exactly.
there's still no social safety net?
Yes. Essentially, this is a savings society, a great savings culture. That is what they do. That's what they're used to doing.
Okay, just very quickly, let me take the other side then. Should everything go according to plan, the way you see things happening in your book, let's say, China becomes the #1 preeminent power in the world, overtakes the U.S., etc., starts becoming culturally dominant as well, starts to export that. Is all this going to happen? Does it assume that the Communist Party is going to still be in power or not? I have to ask you.
Well, I mean, just say one other thing, because Shashi raised it as well. And that is, we should presume the Chinese growth rate over time will continue to fall. Okay? So we got used to 10% up until around 2010, or even sometimes greater than that. But over 35 years, average of just under 10%. Now it's maybe 7%, maybe 6.5%, maybe 6%. I think the Chinese can sustain 5 to 6% over the next 20 years. Because they've still got a large number of people in the countryside. They've still, it's still parts of the economy well behind the more advanced areas.
5-6% sustained is going to be able to achieve social stability, keep them in power,
yes, yeah.
and
I'll come to the power question in a moment. But then, as China gets closer and closer to Western levels of development, the growth rate will decline down to 2 or 3%. In other words, to Western levels. So
yes,
what
would be expected?
So
yeah, but I mean, there are still a couple of questions, Bart. I mean, first of all, there is the completely unpredictable issue of technological disruption, right? So you've got already in the Western world, you've got artificial intelligence systems coming up that are transforming. I mean, robotics technology in both America and Japan. China doesn't have much of a record of developing its own technologies, but there are technologies coming in that may start taking away jobs from China. And that will actually, the kinds of jobs that are being done in China now will suddenly find themselves going back to the West, not to be done by high-paid Westerners, but to be done by unpaid robots and machines and AI systems. Now, in those circumstances, for example, unless China has technology to offer, how does it manage to squeeze that advantage? Second concern, 65% of Chinese growth has come from exports. Exports are going down as the West still lumbers in recession, is unable to pull itself out of it. So you've really got to have a dramatic transformation of your domestic market arrangements in order to be able to drive growth through your own. I mean, in India, for example, some extraordinary percentage, it's slipping my mind at the moment, but certainly over 60% of India's GDP growth has come from Indians making and providing goods and services to other Indians. They've been essentially relatively less touched by what's happening in the external sector, which is the opposite of China's situation. And this is why, in some ways, China has a little more to worry about in the short term. We still haven't got to the politics of it, because if you have unemployed people, and already there's the demography we haven't discussed, where one Chinese man is supporting 4 grandparents, you don't have an efficient state social safety net. If that one person supporting 4 grandparents becomes unemployed, what's going to happen in China? And if that's multiplied by a few tens of millions, will you have unrest the system is able to cope with without that pressure cooker valve?
Well, there have been 2 drivers of Chinese growth hitherto. One is investment, 45% even during the stimulus period, and the other has been exports. Now, they're bringing the investment rate down now because it's too high. Because the problem with having such a high investment rate is, one, contributing to corporate indebtedness, and secondly, undermining labour and capital productivity. So they need to bring that down, and they are bringing that down. Secondly, the other driver, as you say, Sashi, is exports. Now, prior to the financial crisis, exports accounted for 35% of Chinese GDP. It's now roughly 24%. And I think that this is probably, I don't know whether it will stay like this, but it certainly won't go back up to what it was before. And it's undesirable for all sorts of reasons for it to go back and forth. So the Chinese need to have new drivers for their growth. And the new drivers have to come from the new sources of technology and production. So, for example, and you're wrong, by the way, about the Chinese not being innovative. In lots of areas, they've become extremely innovative. And
examples?
Well, for example, in the internet, I mean, Alibaba is a very advanced expression. I mean, Alibaba is bigger than Amazon and eBay put together.
But it's a market.
Last year,
The others aren't allowed to compete.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
well, that's
What
not
about the 40,000 cyber police employed by the Chinese?
Alibaba is not a state
Internet
company.
is not exactly a free field.
Alibaba is a private company.
No, but I'm
And Baidu
referring
is
to
a
the
private
fact that
company.
the internet.
I mean, you're saying there are no new sources of growth. These are the new sources of growth. 10% of Chinese retail last year was on the internet, and it's rising at 40% a year. So, and in many ways, in many respects, in the big cities and so on, China is extremely wired up, largest internet population in the world. So the question for the Chinese now is to find and develop these new drivers of growth. And I think that in terms of the structural shift, the early signs are promising, but it is at very early stages still. The signs in terms of increasing consumption are not so encouraging. For that, as you said earlier, they need to develop a much better safety net so people feel more confident in the future and less that they need to save the money themselves. Now, the other question you were pushing me to answer was, well, what's going to happen politically?
Yes, let's finally get to that. Okay, yeah.
Now, I think that as far as one can see at the moment, the position of the Chinese Communist Party is very strong. Why? I mean, it's like governance in any part of the world. The Chinese Communist Party has presided over the greatest economic transformation in modern history and in human history. A most extraordinary change. People's lives and living standards right across China have been utterly transformed. So for that, the Chinese Communist Party enjoys the support and the legitimacy of any political organization which presides over that kind of transformation. Now, 10 years down the road, maybe it won't look the same. Maybe they'll get into trouble over this transition. Maybe they will. Maybe it'll only be, half successful. And maybe the living standards will be affected. Maybe, at the moment, last year they created 11 million jobs. So they can still, so unemployment is very low in China. But maybe they'll run into more difficulty. I mean, I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball. But I certainly recognize these changes are very difficult. But for the foreseeable future, the Chinese Communist Party, I think, is very secure.
How far is the foreseeable
And I'll say something else, and that is, political stability in China is not just an interest of the Chinese. It's also a global interest. What interest have we got in mass political instability and potential implosion in China? The impact of that globally would be far, far greater than what happened in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why? Because China is now the second largest economy in the world, and the fallout from things going wrong on an extremely large scale would be disastrous globally.
Okay.
I agree with Martin on that, by the way. I think we all want to see China succeed. I hope we all want to see India succeed, and for comparable reasons. You don't want to see these big countries failing their people and thereby failing the world, because instability will be chaotic. But my argument, going back to the very first question in that video they asked, is why can't the two countries cooperate much more? I would like to see that blessed border issue settled, because it's an unnecessary irritant.
Now that she has consolidated more power, do you see the prospects of that happening improving now?
I think it can. I mean, it would require some new thinking on both sides. The Indian government surprised many when it announced last year during Prime Minister Modi's visit to China that it would now lift the existing political restrictions on Chinese investment. There were certain sensitive sectors of a strategic nature where Chinese investment was barred, ports, telecoms, and so on. And the government has opened up and said, come in, no problem. China hasn't yet taken that significantly. There are no major new projects announced. But if that happens, that could give China an important stake in the Indian economy. And of course, both countries a stake in each other's well-being. But secondly, I mean, we were just talking off stage, as it were, about this string of pearls theory and so on. I've been quite unwilling. I've been quite unwilling to be seduced by any arguments of some fundamental Chinese desire to strangulate India. First of all, like that old line in World War II about the chicken's neck, and the guy said, some chicken, some neck. The Indian neck is not going to be strangled so easily by Chinese pearls scattered across the Indian Ocean, I assure you. But I don't think the Chinese believe they can do it or would want to do it. And if you look, for example, at the Indian Ocean specifically, we actually have completely compatible interests. We both want to see the sea lanes of communication
Kept open.
in both directions, from the Gulf and East Africa to India and on past us through the Straits and into China, into the South China Sea, and of course in reverse. That flow of traffic helps India, India's growth, Indian goods, Indian oil security, energy security, that works, and it helps China too. Why would it be in China's interest to interdict shipping in the Arabian Sea? It would actually hurt China. And the same with India. So I don't see why we can't say, I would have liked to see, for example, joint patrols against Somali pirates. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the Indian and Chinese navies, instead of doing war games or exercises, worrying about each other, attacking each other, could actually cooperate in a shared interest? I think we now need to start thinking out of the box in both countries. Cooperation is possible. On global issues, we have comparable stakes in the preservation of the global commons. India has been ahead of China in its active involvement in the UN and multilateral institutions. China is catching up very well. And I think there's a lot that they can do together without necessarily seeing a competition. India supported China on the realignment of the Bretton Woods weighted voting numbers. We felt it was absurd that China should have the same weighted vote as Belgium. You know, this is something we are willing to make common cause with China on. Equally, it seems to me that we can't make common cause on something like cybersecurity. China is still a communist system with a top-down system. Ours is a democracy. We believe in a multi-stakeholder internet. So we're not going to be agreeing on every issue, but there are common issues on which we can cooperate. And I don't believe that this needs to be a conflict or a competition all the time.
Okay, fair enough. Let's open it up to the floor. Questions, anybody? Just raise your hands. A microphone will come to you. Just please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and where you're from or who you represent. It's got to be at least a couple. Come on, don't be shy.